Rain hammered the roof of Ridgeview Memorial Hospital the night everything changed. Nurse Elena Cruz had worked the trauma floor for 3 years, and in all that time, nobody at Ridgeview knew her real name wasn't the only thing she kept hidden. She moved through the halls like a shadow, efficient, silent, never raising her voice, never drawing attention. The other nurses joked that she barely spoke 10 words a shift. What they didn't know was that Elena had once commanded silence for a living, in places far darker than a hospital corridor. That night, the emergency room was chaos. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had sent a wave of critical patients through the doors, and the staff was stretched to its limit. Elena worked with the calm precision of someone who had triaged far worse than car accidents, because she had. Her hands moved without hesitation, stabilizing a collapsed lung, calling out vitals, moving to the next bed before anyone else had processed what happened at the last one. Doctors twice her seniority found themselves following her lead without questioning it, because somehow when Elena spoke, things simply worked. That was when Marcus Whitfield arrived. The hospital's CEO, dressed in a white tuxedo jacket from a gala he'd abandoned early, stormed through the ambulance bay with his tie undone and his face red with fury. His daughter had been in the pileup, a fender bender, nothing serious, but Whitfield didn't know that yet, and panic had curdled into rage. He shoved past triage, screaming for someone to tell him where she was. Nobody moved fast enough for him. Nobody answered fast enough. And then he saw Elena, calm and quiet, checking a monitor instead of scrambling to satisfy him. "You," he barked, grabbing her arm. "Where is my daughter? Answer me." Elena, without raising her voice, told him the wing, the room number, that his daughter was stable and being monitored. It should have ended there, but Whitfield's fear had nowhere else to go, and in one horrifying instant, his fist connected with the side of her face. The ER went silent. Nurses froze. A resident dropped a chart. Elena staggered but did not fall, one hand rising slowly to her jaw, blood at the corner of her lip, her expression unreadable in a way that unsettled everyone watching more than tears would have. "You people are useless?" Whitfield spat, before storming off toward the elevators, unaware that security cameras had captured every second, and unaware that somewhere in that footage, in the way Elena's eyes had shifted, not with fear, but with something colder, more assessing. A version of her nobody at Ridgeview had ever met had just been triggered. Within minutes, phones began buzzing throughout the hospital. Not patient phones. Not visitor phones. A private security line rarely used, connected directly to a federal monitoring system that had flagged Elena's biometric signature the moment her pulse spiked past a certain threshold. A fail-safe embedded years ago, when she'd left a life nobody at this hospital could have imagined. The truth was that Elena Cruz was not just a nurse. Before Ridgeview, before the scrubs and the silence, she had been Master Sergeant Elena Reyes, a combat medic attached to a classified special operations unit, the kind of soldier whose file didn't exist in any public record. She had pulled wounded men from firefights under conditions that would break most people, and when her service ended under classified circumstances, she chose to disappear into civilian life, into quiet rooms and quieter shifts, hoping the war would stay behind her. Whitfield had no idea what he had just done. Neither did the hospital board, already whispering about lawsuits and liability. Neither did the nurses gathered around Elena, urging her to sit, to let them examine her, their voices thick with disbelief that their CO, arrogant, difficult but never violent, had crossed a line none of them thought possible. Elena said nothing. She simply pressed a gauze pad to her lip, straightened her scrub top, and looked toward the window, where the storm outside was growing louder, the wind picking up in a way that felt less like weather and more like warning. 12 minutes after the incident, a deep mechanical thrum began to vibrate through the parking structure glass. It grew steadily, rhythmically, until the unmistakable chop of rotor blades cut through the storm. A Black Hawk helicopter descended through the rain and city light, landing hard on the hospital's front lot, scattering ambulances and stunned onlookers. Its side door slid open before the skids had fully settled, and armed operators in tactical gear spilled out in formation, moving with the same silent precision Elena had shown all night, because they were her people. At the front of the formation walked a broad-shouldered man in uniform, rain streaking down a face carved from 2 decades of combat command. his eyes scanning the building with singular focus. He was looking for one person, and when hospital security tried to stop him at the entrance, he didn't slow down. "Where is Master Sergeant Reyes?" he said, not as a question, but as a demand that expected no delay. His voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded soldiers in places most people would never hear about. Every head in that lobby turned. Every whispered theory about the quiet nurse who never talked about her past suddenly collided with the impossible sight in front of them. A Black Hawk, armed operators, a decorated commander asking for her by a name none of them recognized. Marcus Whitfield, still upstairs consoling his daughter, had no idea that his career, his reputation, and everything he thought he understood about power was about to collide head-on with a truth far larger than himself. If you can already feel the storm building behind Elena's silence, make sure you're subscribed, because Chapter 2 is where the truth finally lands, and Marcus Whitfield learns exactly who he raised his hand against. The elevator doors opened onto the 4th floor, and Colonel James Halloway stepped out with the same unshakable calm that had once steadied entire units under fire. Rain still dripped from his uniform, but his focus never wavered as 3 operators fell into position behind him, sealing the hallway without a word needing to be spoken. Nurses pressed themselves against the walls. A security guard reached for his radio and then thought better of it. This was not a man to be questioned, and everyone in that hallway understood it instinctively, the way animals understand a predator has entered the room. Elena was in the break room when he found her, still holding gauze to her lip, still silent, still composed in that unervingly steady way that had defined her 3 years at Ridgeview. When she looked up and saw him, something shifted in her face. Not surprise, but a flicker of the old world reasserting itself, discipline snapping back into her spine like muscle memory. "Colonel," she said quietly, and for the first time all night, her voice carried a weight the hospital staff hadn't heard before. "Sergeant Reyes," Halloway replied, his eyes flicking briefly to the bruise forming along her jaw, something hardening behind his composed exterior. "We picked up your vitals spike 11 minutes ago. Standard protocol brought us in. I need to know if you're compromised." "I'm fine," Elena said. "It was personal, not operational." "That man put his hands on a war hero," Halloway said, loud enough now for the gathering crowd of doctors and nurses to hear clearly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown surgeons go quiet. "Master Sergeant Elena Reyes served 11 years with a Joint Special Operations Medical Unit. She has more confirmed field saves than anyone in this hospital has ever heard of, including combat extractions under direct enemy fire. She left the uniform, not the discipline. And she came here to save lives quietly, without asking anyone to know who she used to be." Gasps rippled through the hallway. Nurses who had worked beside Elena for years, who had seen her stitch wounds with impossible calm, who had watched her talk hysterical families through the worst nights of their lives, stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, pieces of unexplained competence suddenly clicking into a picture none of them had dared imagine. The quiet one. The nurse who never panicked. The woman who could read a trauma room faster than doctors twice her experience. It all made sense now, and it made the moment of Whitfield's fist connecting with her face feel even more monstrous in retrospect. Whitfield chose that exact moment to step off the elevator, still riding the adrenaline of his daughter's stable condition, still unaware that his world was about to fracture. He froze when he saw the operators, the colonel, the crowd, and Elena standing at the center of it all, her composure a stark contrast to his unraveling expression. "What is this?" he stammered. "What is going on?" "You struck a decorated combat medic in the line of civilian duty," Halloway said, turning to face him fully, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop several degrees. "This hospital's cameras will confirm it. Federal record will confirm it. And when this becomes public, Mr. Whitfield, you will not be remembered as the CEO who built this hospital's East Wing. You will be remembered as the man who assaulted Master Sergeant Reyes." Whitfield's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging, his authority evaporating in real time in front of the very staff who had feared him for years. The hospital board members, alerted by frantic calls, began arriving within the hour, faces pale as they absorbed the scope of what had happened. Legal counsel murmured about liability. Reporters, tipped off by a scanner catching military radio chatter, began gathering outside. What had been a private moment of cruelty was now a story unfolding in real time, and at its center stood a woman who had never asked for any of it. Elena, for her part, remained remarkably unmoved by the spectacle. When Holloway asked if she wanted him to escalate further, to press for formal charges through military-adjacent channels, she simply shook her head. "Let the hospital handle it," she said. "I didn't come back to fight wars. I came back to heal people." It was that quiet dignity, more than the helicopter, more than the operators, more than the colonel's booming declaration, that finally broke through to the staff watching her. This wasn't a woman seeking vindication. She had simply been living her truth in silence, and the world had forced its way in. By morning, Whitfield had resigned under board pressure, his career unraveling as swiftly as it had once seemed untouchable. Elena returned to her shift 2 days later, scrubs pressed, expression calm as if nothing had changed, except everything had. Nurses who once overlooked her now sought her guidance. Doctors who once dismissed her instincts now deferred to them without hesitation. She never asked for the recognition, never wanted the spotlight, but Ridgeview Memorial would never see her the same way again, and neither would anyone who heard how a single act of cruelty had unearthed the quiet strength of a hero who had simply been waiting patiently to be seen.